In today's video, we're going to continue our NHL Season Preview series for the upcoming 2018-19 season. Today's team we're taking a look at is the St. Louis Blues, and that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Well, as I mentioned off the top, today we're going to do the season preview for the St. Louis Blues. Now, you could certainly say the Blues were one of the most active teams during the 2018 NHL offseason. Obviously, the 17-18 season didn't quite go as planned for St. Louis. This team missed the playoffs last year, and their management team took it upon themselves to make substantial changes here to kind of bolster their chances of getting back to the playoffs this year. As we've done in other season preview videos, we're going to break this up into 4 segments. Segment 1, we're going to take a look at their 17-18 season, take a deep dive into their team statistics and analyze how they did last year. In the second segment, we're going to call that additions and subtractions, where we take a look at last year's roster versus this year's, take a look at players who came into the team this year versus players who left. Thirdly, we're going to take a look at the projected lineup that we expect the Blues to put on the ice for opening night. And in the last segment, I'm going to give you my thoughts and projections for how they're going to perform for the upcoming 18-19 season. So let's jump right in here and take a look at how they did in 17-18. The St. Louis Blues finished their season with a record of 44-32-6 for 94 points, missing the playoffs by 1 measly point. It was down between them and the Colorado Avalanche straight down to the final game of the season, and unfortunately they came up short. Everything was well within their control. All they had to do was win and get in, and unfortunately they could not get the job done. They ended up finishing 5th in the Central Division and missing the playoff. Even though this team has a fair bit of offensive weapons, they did have some trouble scoring last year. That was not one of their strong suits. They ended up scoring 223 goals last year, putting them 24th best in the NHL. However, they only gave up 222 goals against, which put them tied for 6th. So goals against was certainly much better, gave them a goal differential of +1. Now let's jump over here and take a quick look at their special teams. Their power play only clicked at a 15.5% success rate, so obviously that is not real solid. That put them in 30th best in the NHL. So obviously their power play needs to drastically improve over last year to improve the overall team success. With the amount of players they can put out on the power play, that kind of result just really isn't acceptable for the Blues. Their penalty killing was certainly more respectable than their power play, finishing with a success rate of 79.6% for 18th best in the NHL. So obviously that's not a fantastic result, but it certainly could be worse. Certainly a much better result than their power play. When this team scored first, they had a record of 34-8-3. So obviously scoring first was very important for this team. They did manage to score the first goal on quite a few occasions. When they gave up the first goal, they had a record of 10-24-3. So obviously they did score the first goal more than they gave it up, but when they allowed the first goal, it did make things awfully difficult for them to come back. Now let's jump over here and take a look at their scoring breakdown by period. We'll take a look at how they did in the first, second, and third periods to see if we can find a trend here and where things kind of broke down and went wrong for them throughout the season. In the first period, they were outscored by their opponents by a score of 54-45, so obviously that's not some great start. Scoring 45 goals in 82 first periods really isn't the best, so obviously they could certainly stand to have some better starts this year. Second periods were certainly a little bit better. They outscored their opponents 79-76. So for the most part, a lot of that scoring done in the second period was relatively even in most games. Obviously, the second period result is better than the first period, but when you're leaving the first period more often than not down by at least a goal, the fact that your second period result only kind of brings you even certainly makes it difficult to come back and win a lot of those games. As we saw when their opponent scored first, they did often have a hard time coming back to win. Third period scoring was pretty even as well at 87-86. So the big issue with the Blues last year was allowing too many goals too early on in the first period. They had too many occasions where they got down early and just did not have that ability to manage to come back. Once they got to overtime, their overtime record wasn't too bad. It was certainly respectable. They scored 8 goals and allowed 6, so obviously that's 8 times that they scored in the 3-on-3 and got themselves the victory while giving up 6 goals during the 3-on-3 period. They did go to shootout 3 times and actually had the best record in the NHL. They were a perfect 3-0. So obviously the shootout was good to them. Overtime wasn't too bad, but a lot of times, unfortunately, they just could not get the game to that point, coming up short by the time they were at the end of 60 minutes. During the 17-18 season, there were 16 times that they were in a 1-goal game, and they had an exact even 8-8 record. So obviously, if they could have come out on top even just in a few more of those games, even one for that matter, they would have been a playoff team. So if they could have scored a little bit more in the first period and managed to actually hold on and win just even a couple more of those close 1-goal games, that would have made all the difference in the world for them being a team in the playoffs or not, and could have been the difference between having like 94 points and 98 or 100. It goes to show that there's so many little things that happen throughout the year that can have a major impact on your season, even though I might not realize it at the time. Now let's jump over here to the additions and subtraction segment, and this is going to be a little bit longer than most teams as they've had quite a few changes with this roster year over year. Now let's start here with the subtractions and players that are no longer with the Blues that played with them last season. Obviously, backup goaltender Carter Hutton is a big member of this group here. Obviously, he played a very important role for them last year during times when Jake Allen was being inconsistent and struggled. Hutton had some really strong play and certainly had one of his better seasons, playing more than he has in the past. Obviously, he had an opportunity to sign with the Buffalo Sabres to have a chance at a starting job there, so he's going to get a lot more playing time, so he's moved on through free agency. They also had a couple of forwards leave through free agency as well. One, Kyle Brodziak, signed with the Edmonton Oilers, and Scotty Upshall was not offered a new deal. He's going with the Oilers to training camp on a professional tryout. Now, the other members of the team that are no longer there mostly resulted from the big trade bringing in Ryan O'Reilly. Obviously, forwards Patrick Berglund, Vladimir Sopotka, and Tage Thompson were all involved in that deal to bring in O'Reilly, so they're all off the roster as well. So we've seen some pretty significant changes. Quite a few players from last year's roster are no longer with this club. Obviously, as I mentioned here, the big acquisition for the Blues during the 2018 offseason here was Ryan O'Reilly. It does look like he's going to get a chance to play a very big role with this team, and certainly will be a huge asset for them at center ice moving forward. They've also brought in a number of players via free agency, including former winger David Perron, who has played with this team on occasions before, played last year with Vegas, and has come back to the St. Louis Blues. They also brought in hometown guy Pat Maroon. Maroon last year played with the Oilers and the New Jersey Devils, being traded to New Jersey at the deadline, has now signed with the St. Louis Blues here during the offseason. They also brought in veteran center iceman Tyler Bozak, whose time with the Toronto Maple Leafs has come to an end. Obviously, the Leafs let guys like Bozak and JVR and Leo Komarov hit free agency to go into a new direction. So obviously, Bozak will add to their depth here at center ice. They also had to bring in a new backup goaltender due to the departure of Carter Hutton. So they signed veteran backup goaltender Chad Johnson, who's had a pretty decent career as a backup. Obviously, Chad Johnson's never been a starter in this league, but should provide a decent backup role here to Jake Allen. They also brought in some other veteran forwards like Brian Flynn and Jordan Nolan, although it's not really clear yet if they'll make this roster. They very well may end up playing in the American Hockey League. Now let's jump over here to the next segment where we take a look at their projected lineup here for opening night on the 2018-19 season. Now they do have a ton of forwards with this group, so it's not really clear yet if some of their youngsters will get a chance to play. I did put together my projected lineup, so this is how I would put it together if I was the coach and general manager of the St. Louis Blues. Since they have so many forwards, regardless of what they do with their young players or not, it's quite possible that they're going to have some of these guys likely hit the waiver wire during the preseason or as the regular season opens up to get their roster intact here for opening night. Some of these guys very well may end up getting claimed or may end up playing at the American Hockey League level, but because of all the guys they signed during the offseason, they have more than enough forwards, and they all can't make the lineup here on a regular basis. Ryan O'Reilly is expected to play the top line center role with winger Vladimir Tarasenko. Obviously, Tarasenko had shoulder surgery here during the offseason. He is expecting to be ready to go here for opening night, so hopefully Tarasenko can get back to his scoring ways and boost his goal totals as well. Now, the other winger spot on this line is a little bit up for grabs. They could very well place veteran David Perron, who they signed as a free agent. They very well might give youngster Robbie Fabry a chance to play there as well. Obviously, Fabry is very offensive and has been out for the better part of the last year and a half or more with significant injuries, but is ready to roll here for the 18-19 season. So we might get a chance to see Fabry play in that line. It could be David Perron as well, not really clear, but either way, they have some options up there for sure. The second line for the Blues will consist of center icemen Braden Shen and Jaden Schwartz. Obviously, Shen and Schwartz really clicked really well last year with Shen's first year here with the Blues, so you definitely want to keep that duo together. The other winger spot on that line very well could be Alex Steen, or depending on who plays on that first line, whether it be Perron or Fabry, they could slot one of those two guys as there as well and drop Steen down here to line 3. Line 3 likely is going to be centered by newcomer Tyler Bozak. I would fully suspect the other winger on the third line likely will be Patrick Maroon. So depending on how exactly they decide to do their top 2 lines, your third line will be Tyler Bozak along with Pat Maroon, and like I said, either Fabry or Steen will likely slot on the left side. As a fourth line, I'd like to see the Blues put together a kid line myself. If I were making this lineup, I would put together Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, and Nikita Soshnikov. Now, that's what I would do, but they do have plenty of other guys here who can play those bottom 6 fourth line minutes, so it's hard to say exactly what they're going to do. So the other guys they have under contract who very well could fit on that fourth line would be guys like Yaskin and Barbashev and Sundqvist and Thorburn. Brian Flynn's another one, obviously Jordan Nolan. Some of these guys are going to have to go down and play in the American Hockey League or could get claimed on waivers. They're not going to have room for all of these players for sure. So it's hard to say exactly how they're going to proceed, but I'd really like to see them give their youngsters like Kyrou and Thomas a chance, at least early on, to see how they can play and how they can handle it, and see if they can stick with the NHL during the 18-19 season. Back in, your top pair is going to be Alex Pietrangelo, your captain. Obviously, Pietrangelo had a big offseason. Obviously, him and his wife had triplets, so hopefully he's well adjusted to the new family life and will not have any impacts on his season. He'll likely be paired with defenseman Joel Edmondson here on your top pair. Your second pair is going to be Jay Bouwmeester and Colton Parayko. Obviously, another solid pair. So your top 4 for the St. Louis Blues D-core is certainly well intact. I fully suspect your third pair likely going to be youngster Vince Dunn along with Robert Bortuzzo. You're likely going to have Carl Gunnarsson probably be that number 7 guy who could be in and out of the lineup and play as needed. In goal, you're going to have starting goaltender Jake Allen. Obviously, this is a very important year for Allen. He needs to bounce back and really show that he can be a solid starter at the NHL level here before the team loses confidence in him. Every year, he seems to have a stretch of time where he kind of loses his confidence and goes into inconsistent play. He really needs to avoid that this year to really help this team take a leap forward, and as well for his own career, just to kind of solidify himself as a solid starting goaltender in the NHL. Now, I'd like to see Allen play 60 solid games, obviously improve his statistics. Last year he had 2.75 goals against. He needs to cut that down, obviously. Save percentage needs to get up a little higher as well. So hopefully with a more solid team in front of him, his stats will improve, and obviously his confidence is key to his play as well. So hopefully Allen can have a more solid year and, like I said, really solidify himself as a starting goaltender here at the NHL. Backing him up, obviously, we have Chad Johnson, as I had previously mentioned, newcomer to the team. And should either of those guys be injured or not be playing very well, they do have youngster Ville Husso and has been grooming in the minors and likely could become the goaltender of the future at some point in time here for the St. Louis Blues. Now, jumping over to my predictions and projections here and how I think they're going to do this year. If you watch my prediction video on the Central Division, I do expect the St. Louis Blues to improve quite a bit over last year. Keep in mind, they really didn't have that bad of a year. They only missed the playoffs by 1 measly point. And they've made a lot of changes to improve this roster year over year. The only concern I have with all the changes that they've made is they didn't really add a lot of element of speed. That's the main reason why I really hope they allow youngsters like Thomas and Kyrou to get some playing time this year and get their feet wet in the NHL. As much as a lot of the guys they added are veterans and they're pretty decent players for the positions they're going to be placed in, I'd like to see them be a little bit quicker. I mean, obviously players like Tyler Bozak certainly has lost a step. He can certainly be a good player who can contribute on the third line. Pat Maroon's never been the fleetest of foot. Decent player. Again, he can serve his role, but speed is certainly not his strong point as well. Ryan O'Reilly and David Perron are certainly better skaters than those two, but again, they're not exactly known as the fastest players going. So they could certainly use a little bit of injection of youth and speed into this lineup. So I'd like to see them take Kyrou and Thomas as well as Soshnikov and make sure they give them ample playing time, and hopefully they can play them over some of these other bottom 6 kind of fringe NHL players that they have on their roster here, and hopefully they can make room for them to have enough playing time this year. So as I mentioned in my prediction video, I put the Blues in 3rd place in the Central Division, getting back into the playoffs. Obviously, teams like Winnipeg and Nashville, I think, are still going to be too strong for them to place higher than them in the standings. So I think a 3rd place finish is the best that the Blues can hope for. And I do think if they get some good performances out of their goaltending and some other players that I expect to kind of perform at a higher level this year as well, I think they can make that happen. Obviously, if they can put the puck in the net more than last year and keep their goals against around where it was, they'll be in excellent shape. So I'd love to hear your comments down below. What do you expect out of the St. Louis Blues for the 18-19 season? Do you think they're going to bounce back and perform better? Do you see them making the playoffs? I'd love to hear your comments down below in the comment section, and we can continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.